Welcome everyone to this week's video lecture for History 1306, or U.S. History after 1877. And I shouldn't call it a video lecture because it's not a lecture at all. What we're really focusing on this week is a review session for Exam 1. And we're going to be talking about what to expect on this test and how to prepare for it and approach the exam itself so that you'll be well ready to answer the types of questions and the things that you're going to see on this exam. It's important that you take the time that I'm giving you at the beginning of this week. You don't have any new lectures. You don't have any assignments. There's no discussion for them. All I want you focusing on this week is preparing for the exam and then taking the exam. So our exam window will open up on Thursday at midnight, so 12 a.m. Thursday, and it will stay open till 11:59 p.m. Sunday. You have to take the exam sometime in that window. When you choose to take it in that window is entirely up to you, but it is important that you make sure it is completed before that 11:59 p.m. deadline on Sunday night. So the goal of this review session is to help you familiarize yourself with the format and the structure of the exam and give you an idea of how you can go about studying. And the first thing I want to say right up front is that you are always welcome to email me, contact me, anything you need if you have questions or concerns about the exam. And this seems like a good time to remind you all that the best way to get a hold of me is through direct email. It'll pop right up on my phone, and I can answer your questions in a timely fashion. So the first thing I will say is that the test format, this is probably the number one question that everybody has during a review session, is how many questions and what are they going to look like on the exam. There's going to be two different types of questions on this exam. The first are the 22 multiple choice questions. These are going to be worth half a point each. So when you total that up, there's a possibility of 11 points for the multiple choice section of the exam. Then we have 6 term identification questions. These are short answers that ask 3 components of you, and they are worth 1.5 points each, or 1.5 points each. So that adds up to a total of 9 points. When you put those all together, they equal 20 points. And if you look at our syllabus, that's what this exam is worth in the overall grade. So I'm not very good at math, so I just make the exams total up to whatever they're supposed to be in the overall sort of structure of the class. If it's worth 20 points, then it's a 20% of your grade. It's a 20-point exam. So that by the time we get up to the end of the semester, you have 100 total points possible in the course. That makes it easy to translate to a percentage. You see where I'm going with that. That is the test format. Now, there are a number of rules that you need to be aware of when you go into this exam. First and foremost, you only get one shot at this. You can only open that exam window one time. And so, with that being the case, you need to make sure that when you sit down to do this exam, you have a stable internet connection, that you are ready to go, that you're not going to get booted off of the internet, you're not going to get kicked out of Blackboard or whatever the language or vernacular might be. You need to make sure that you have a stable internet connection and that for an hour and 15 minutes, which is the allotted time for the exam, you're going to be able to sit down and focus on nothing but this exam. So just make sure that you're prepared for that, you do have an hour and 15 minutes to finish it. If you finish sooner, it's okay. But once you have opened that exam window, that is it. You have to finish it in one sitting. Any attempt to close out of that exam window is going to submit the exam for grading. And so you can't close it out and then come back to it later. You can't start it one day and finish it the next. You have to do it all at one time. And so whether or not you intend to close out of the exam window, it is going to automatically submit for grading. Now, that's the way it's set up and that's the way it's designed. You're taking this exam entirely within a Blackboard framework. I don't use Respondus Lockdown Browser. I usually get some questions about that from online classes. I don't use it because the fact of the matter is it's highly ineffective and it causes more glitches than it does prevent plagiarism or cheating on an exam. So most students have multiple devices that are capable of connecting to the internet, so you could easily work with one while you're locked down in another. The other part of it is with Respondus Lockdown Browser, it's just more likely you have one more operating system working in there. It's probably not the right technical term for it, but it's got one more set of programming that you're filtering the exam through, and that has a tendency to make people get disconnected, booted off, all these other problems that tend to come up in online environments. So that's why I don't use it. So you don't need a lockdown browser. You don't need any of that stuff. You're just going to take the exam in the Blackboard sort of setting. So in the exam formatter. So what you're going to do is all the questions are going to be presented one at a time. And they might be presented in random order. You don't know what type of question you're going to get. It could be a term ID or it could be a multiple choice. They're just kind of randomly generated and spit out at you. Now, you are going to basically be able to skip over those questions, but you got to make sure you go back to them later. It's not going to have any kind of automatic reminder for you. You need to remember what you skipped and go back and answer it later. So that's the sort of structure of the exam. To remind you all about the rules, you are not to use any resource, my lectures, the textbook, websites, anything. You're not allowed to use it during the exam. And some of you might be going, well, if he's not using Respondus Lockdown Browser, then it will be fairly easy to go and copy and paste something off of the internet and answer his term ID questions. The truth of the matter is that is not actually how it works. I'm fairly familiar with the main websites that talk about these things. I have a pretty good idea of when you're copying and pasting from a website. Do not plagiarize. Do not cheat. If I see an answer that basically looks like it's word for word taken from my lecture, I know that you have now violated the rules of the exam. Students can come to me and say, but I wrote that down on a separate sheet of paper. I copied that, and then I used it as a study guide, and then I took it from the study guide, so it was actually my work that I put. No, you copied it exactly, and then you eventually pasted it into exam. Putting it in an intermediary place doesn't change the fact that you're cheating, especially since to get it word for word as to how I had it on the lecture, you had to be looking at some resource, whether it's a study guide, a textbook. You are not allowed to use anything during this exam. And I do deliberately build what they call red herrings into these exams. Things that you might think, if you were to go and Google it, if you were to go and type it into any sort of search engine on the internet, it'll give you an answer that looks kind of reasonable, and you might be able to paste that in and think you're getting away with it. But that's actually designed, you're not going to get the right answer because I know what's out there on the internet and I know what they're writing about it. And so what all it's going to really function to do is tell me when you were looking on the internet for answers and when you were answering things honestly. And so I know that, I don't want to start this on too sour of a note and sound like an ogre, but I really do take this seriously, and I have absolutely no sympathy for cheaters and plagiarizers. And so I give you these warnings up front. I tell you from the beginning of the semester, it's listed in your syllabus. I take plagiarism seriously. You might have some other professors who don't. That is their prerogative. In their class, you can do whatever you think you can get away with. In my class, I do not tolerate cheating, and I don't tolerate plagiarism. So if you're thinking you're going to go and pull resources from other areas and paste them into the exam, you're going to get nailed for plagiarism, and you will receive an automatic 0. If the particular episode of plagiarism is so grievous or so flagrant, is really the word they use in UHD's sort of academic honesty policies, you actually can end up failing the entire class just on this one exam. And so it is really critically important you avoid these kinds of things. You're better off doing poorly on the first exam and then making up for it with extra credit and curves and everything later on down the line. I give students opportunities to make up the grade. However, if you are hit with plagiarism and you're going to get an automatic 0, you don't even get the points that you guessed right on this exam, and then you're also barred from participating in any kind of extra credit in the future. With basically the goal being, if you think you're going to cheat your way through the class, I'm not going to give you extra opportunities to make points. So that is really, I know it just probably is not the best place to start in terms of optics, but in all reality, I want to make sure I'm crystal clear about this, because plagiarism is very unpleasant for you. You don't want to get that email. It's equally unpleasant for me. I don't like accusing people of breaking the rules, of cheating. It's not a nice thing to have to do, even from the instructor's side of things. It brings me no joy to fail somebody for any reason, and it certainly doesn't bring me any joy to fail somebody for plagiarism or for cheating. So please make sure you're avoiding that and just simply sticking to the exam window and answering those questions as honestly as you can. And so looking at the different types of questions we have here, you've got multiple choice and term IDs. The multiple choice, there's not that much to say about them. And it could be multiple choice or true false. I tend to put both those kinds of questions in together in my exams. And there's going to be 22 of these kinds of questions. These questions are designed to see if you've looked at the material. Are you even familiar with what we're talking about? Did you understand the content of those lectures in the course readings? My presupposition in all of this is, if I didn't get a question from you regarding the material, my assumption is you understood it. And so this is where I'm testing for that. I didn't get a lot of content-related questions so far this semester. So now's the time to see how much of that did you actually understand. These questions don't require a lot of analytical work, but it helps me ensure that you've covered I can cover the range of topics that we've discussed in that exam, and making sure that you're paying ample attention to those particular subjects. So I've given you a couple on the PowerPoint review slide. I absolutely have to say you have got to go through that. It is mandatory. It's going to give you the most important stuff this week. But I've given you some examples of how I would take some of the key terms we've looked at in our course so far and turn them into a multiple choice or a true-false question. So that brings us to the other part of the exam, the term identifications. This is the part of the exam that will make or break your grade almost universally. So this is the part of my exams where most of the points are lost. And I don't often tell you all why I design things the way I do or why I set it up that way. But in this instance, it's kind of important. What I am doing with these term IDs is I have no use for essays. In-test essays where you're being forced to try to synthesize all of this information and put it into an eloquent, well-written 3-paragraph response. To me, I end up getting a lot of gibberish that, if you look at it on the surface, a lot of generalized blanket statements. I don't like those. You're not really saying anything. You're just filling space and hitting word minimums. And so I don't find it's a very effective way to see what you learned. If I want you to pull out, a big, longer writing, synthesizing a lot of the events and things we've talked about, that's what a paper is for. So in my exams, I don't give essays. I have term identifications. And these are like mini essays. And with that in mind, I think I want to say this at least 3 times here today. You cannot answer these with bullet points. If you answer these questions with bullet points, or just here's one sentence for the context, here's one sentence for the ID, here's one sentence and they don't relate or segue with one another. If you put 1, 2, 3, or ... and you answer next to them, you are going to get 0 points on your term IDs. This has to be written in prose form, like a paragraph. Full sentences, capitalization at the beginning, punctuation at the end and in between, proper grammar. You are expected to be writing this as if you were writing an essay, because it is fulfilling the writing component of our course. So that's why I've organized it in this way. Now, each one of these term identifications, as I've already mentioned, is worth 1.5 points. That's 3 times more than a multiple choice question. And that's because you are being asked to give 3 things, 3 components in each one of your answers for this. The first component you need to give me is what I generally kind of call context. And that's how I'm going to grade it. I'll be looking for whether or not you got a point for context. And here what you need to do is you need to address the time period and the location that is relevant to this term. So sometimes that time period can be narrowed down to an individual year. Other times it can be expanded to identify a big range of years. A couple of examples that I gave you here in the PowerPoint slide is to sort of show you how this works. The Haymarket Riot and the Great Migration. These are both key terms we encountered in our course so far. And if you were to see Haymarket Riot as a term ID on the exam, you would need to identify that that happened in 1886. It was a one-day thing. It happened in a single year. So you don't have to give me the day or the month, but you do have to tell me that it happened in 1886. That's when it occurred. Now, if you say in the 19th century, you're not going to get points. At the end of the 19th century, you're getting closer, but I'm still not going to give you points. My expectation is you know the year that the Haymarket Riot happened. Now, if you're to see something like Great Migration on the exam, You have to tell me that it's something that's happening between roughly 1910 and 1970. That's, if you were to say it happened for the first half of the 20th century, I will give you credit for that. Because you're covering this range of years. It's not just one single year an event happened and that was it. This is a process that played out over a large number of years. The same thing can be said about the geographic location. If you're looking at the Haymarket riot, you need to place it in Chicago, Illinois. That's where it happened. There's no other Haymarket riot going on in American history. That's where you need to locate it, Chicago, Illinois. But the Great Migration occurred over the entire nation. It was people moving from the American South to the American North. So there you simply need to tell me the pattern of migration. If it's something that's nationwide, you can say it happened in the U.S. or in America. That's good enough. But my expectation is that you're giving me as much information as you can about this. You need to be almost expert when you're looking at these things. You need to tell me a lot of detailed information about this. And so that's why we're using it as our writing component. So that's the context. You need to tell me the when and the where as closely as you possibly can. Now, the second component of a term identification is the detailed identification with emphasis on the word detailed. You cannot just give me a basic identification of what it is. In other words, you can't go, the Haymarket riot was a riot. You can't say the Great Migration was a migration. You can't say the Haymarket riot was an issue between police and labor activists. You're being too vague, too general, and not specific enough. So this, in the second component here, this is where you tell me as much about the event as you can. This is where you explain what the term is actually referring to. And when we go back to those previously used examples, a good answer here for the Haymarket riot would be, this was a clash between labor organizers and labor police. It began as a protest over the death of 3 labor organizers in a previous demonstration, and then this particular event in Haymarket Square turned violent after a protester threw a bomb at the police. This led to the riot and 8 deaths. That's the level of detail I'm looking for when I ask for detailed identification. You told me the most important thing. It is a riot and a violence that broke out between labor demonstrators and labor police. But you're giving me more detail than that. You're explaining why the riot happened. What was the impetus for it? Why did a protest turn into a riot? Because somebody threw a bomb. This is the level of detail that I'm looking for in these answers. So if you're going to say it was a riot, you're not going to get points. If you're going to say it was an issue over labor organization, that's not going to net you points. Don't just give me simple statements like that. It's not going to work. So the third component of a term identification question is importance or significance. I generally refer to it as a significance. Why do we care about this term? Why did I even bother making it bolded out in my lecture or underlining it? Why did I put it on the study guide? Why am I talking about it right now in our review session? And so this is, there's a lot of people tend to think if it happened in the past, it's history. It's not. I got up, I brushed my teeth, and I took a shower, and, well, I didn't shave. But anyway, the point is, it's not history. No one cares what I did this morning. No one cares that I fed some cats outside. Nobody cares. It's not history. What's history is things that have a greater significance or importance on the trajectory of the United States. It has some pattern of cause and effect that we can draw out between this and another event. So, coming back to our particular example here, we'll go back to that example of the Haymarket riot. The importance of this can be summed up in a single sentence, but a lot of times the importance is open to interpretation. There's more than one point of importance. So the Haymarket riot led to a substantial downturn in public support for labor organizations because the media cast them as violent outlaws after that riot. And so public support drops for labor organizations. That's the importance of it in U.S. history. That's why it's an important event. If it was a riot where 8 people were killed, and that was it, and it didn't do anything to our overall discussion of labor organization and unionization, then it wouldn't have really come out. It wouldn't have been that important of a thing to talk about. But this is why it's important, because it made people in the American public at large turn their backs on the labor organizers and the unions. Made them basically say, I don't want to support those causes anymore. And so we see a massive downturn in those organizations. Then you could also phrase it in a different way. You could say labor organizers would be labeled as anarchists and terrorists after this event. And so they don't want to join, laborers don't want to join up with these groups anymore. So their membership all drops down on a national level. These are the types of points of significance that I'm looking for when we're doing these term IDs. Now, you have got to answer all 3 points for the term ID. I do give partial credit. I'll go through it if you've got the context right, but nothing else. I'm going to give you 0.5 out of 1.5. If you get the context and the detailed identification right, you're going to get 1 out of 1.5. So you can see how I'm going to grade it. Now, there's another thing that needs to be said here. Obviously, if you don't get the detailed identification right, then what you're going to end up dealing with is a situation in which it's hard to find the significance. How do you know what's significant about it if you don't even know what it is? And so that's something where you generally, what I tend to see is that somebody is either going to get the context and then nothing else right, or they get the rest of it and they get the context wrong. It's rare, but sometimes it happens because students will define something and then never talk about why they're defining it. So it does happen. But I just wanted to sort of point that out, that those things, they're not part and parcel of one another. They kind of blend together. So the next slide in the PowerPoint presentation is just an example of how I score the term IDs. And again, I reiterated it, you cannot use bullet points. If you use any form of bullet point, whether they're numbered, whether they don't have anything in front of them at all, but that's just separate individual statements, you are not going to get points. You'll receive no credit. I cannot stress this enough. So I'm going to send it out in my announcements too, and I'm going to keep talking about it. But it's important to know that you will not get credit if you choose to answer these as 1, 2, 3. There's your points. You're done. You have to answer it in complete sentences with punctuation in prose form. So there's my second yell about that one. So as I mentioned, I'm just going to kind of go through all this. You have an hour and 15 minutes for the exam. You cannot reopen it once you've opened the window. So you have to set all this time aside at once. You're going to be able to go back to questions and answer them later. So just remember that you've got to go back physically and take care of it. You don't ever lose points for attempting to answer. You don't. It's not like you would have had more points if you didn't try a term ID you don't know. If you just don't get it right, you just don't get it right. That's the way it is. So even if your answer is nonsense, maybe you get lucky and you somehow eke a point out of it. So just give an attempt no matter what you do. The questions are going to appear in random order. So you could get a multiple choice or a term identification at any point during the exam. So here's my third time. Don't use bullet points on term IDs. All right, there's 3. I followed through on my promise. So there's a couple of things I tend to see, and I've been doing this quite a long time, and it doesn't really change from semester to semester, no matter how much I warn people. I've noticed some trends among undergraduates that you will want to avoid if you want to avoid losing points on the exam. I've already hit the first one. That is plagiarism. Please, please, please do not do it. Or cheating. It's kind of, they're one and the same as we're talking about the exam, because by plagiarizing some other answer, you've cheated. So I know that you might think that Quizlet, Google definitions, Wikipedia, all these things might be good resources for studying. But if you happen to copy their answers word for word, or even a close facsimile or paraphrasing of it, then you have cheated on the exam. You're not supposed to be using those resources. So what's important to understand is that I've spent my adult life in academia. My job is to track down sources. That's what I do for a living as a historian. If you can find it in a Google search in the middle of an exam while you're being timed, you can bet your bottom dollar that I'm going to find that same source when I'm grading your exam. And I check every exam for plagiarism. It slows me down greatly, but it's just part of what we need to do to keep things running in a smooth and sort of honest way. But just remember, if you found it, I'm going to find it too. You probably didn't go to the deep, dark corners of the world to find this information. So I'm going to be able to track it down as well. Now, this is, when I'm saying this during this review video and I'm writing about it in the days leading up to the exam, this is it. This is your warning. There is no coming to me afterwards and going, yeah, I'm sorry I did that. Can I still get points on the exam, or are you going to let it go? No. This is your one and only warning, and I have heard every manner of excuse that could possibly be thrown out there related to this. Well, I was just using the Wikipedia page as a placeholder, and I forgot to delete it. It was just an honest mistake. Why did you have Wikipedia open during the exam in the first place? There's the problem, is that that's not a reasonable excuse. You should have nothing open. Why was it open? I was running out of time, and I thought that would be better than leaving it blank. No, that's not true. If you leave it blank, you get a 0 for that question. If you plagiarize, you get a 0 for the whole exam. So any points you racked up during the multiple choice, all gone because of what you did by not leaving it blank and putting somebody else's work in there as your own. And I've even heard people just blatantly come to me and go, I didn't know I couldn't copy and paste somebody else's work and put it in there and say it's mine. Well, you should know that because it's in every policy for every course. It's in every guidebook about academic honesty at UHD and every other university in the world. So, no, that's not a reasonable excuse. If you come to me afterwards and start trying to say these things, I'm just going to shut it down. I'm going to say, I don't want to hear it. I don't care. You were warned in advance. Whatever your excuse is, it's not good enough to get you out of your automatic 0 for plagiarism. So, ultimately, you've got to avoid plagiarizing, cheating, taking things from even my course lectures or the reading. If you're copying stuff word for word out of there instead of just relying on your memory and what you studied about, then you have the risk of running afoul of this rule because you're not to be using any of those resources during the exam. So, ultimately, you want to make sure that you're avoiding general blanket statements in your term identifications. Things that have little to no meaning or value whatsoever. I know why students do this. They're trying to fill space. They may not know what they're talking about, so they're going to just venture some sort of general blanket statement. I mean, I gave you 3 examples here that they are real examples. I've pulled them right out of exams and given them to you. So I've seen things like America is a nation that is unique. What does that mean? Every nation can be considered unique because they're different from one another. It's a stupid, pointless statement that doesn't need to be made. So don't make it. Just say what you need to say about American history or about the event that you're looking at. Don't make these big blanket statements. With the term IDs, I generally see this as the point of significance. Whenever someone's trying to tell me why it's important, they go, it was important because it was really, really, really critical to the development of America. How? That's going to be the natural question that anybody would ask, is how? And then your response in the exam doesn't answer that, you don't get points for it. So I've seen slavery was very bad. Yes, it was. What does that have to do with your answer? It's a pointless statement to make. We're not debating about the values or the efficacy of slavery. You're just trying to fill space by making a generalized statement. I've seen Islam is a religion that Islamic people follow. Asian Americans are people living in America of Asian descent. These are stupid statements to make. We're in a university level class. So you've got to get rid of these kinds of statements. They're not going to net you any points. And I'm not looking, you might notice, I don't have a mandatory minimum for these answers. I'm not saying you have to give me at least 400 words for each answer or anything like that. That's not how I do it. Did you answer all 3 components of the term ID that I asked you for? Some people can do that in 3 sentences. Other people might take them 3 paragraphs. It depends on what kind of writer you are. But if it's 3 paragraphs of Islam is a religion that Islamic people follow, you're not getting any points because that's just a waste of time. You're wasting space. So finally, one of the biggest pitfalls that I tend to see is 1-sentence answers on the term IDs. I try to beat a dead horse when it comes to 3 components for every single answer. And then somebody goes, the Haymarket riot was a riot. Okay, I'm just going to put a 0 and move on. So you've got to make sure you're prepared to answer these things as fully as you can, to give me all of those points of information. They're really, really, really important. So that's pretty much all I need to talk about in terms of the exam. A bit of advice is when you're going through the study guide, if you can treat every one of those terms as a term ID, you're going to do great on the term ID part of the exam, obviously, but you're also going to do really, really well on the multiple choice because usually what I'm asking in the multiple choice questions has something to do with when and where, why it's important, or what it actually was. That's generally any kind of question that with just those three things, if you expand it out to really what we're asking is it's what, when, where, why, and how. Those are the 5 main questions anybody will ever ask you about anything. So if you can answer all of them like a term ID, you're going to be fine on the multiple choice section. And that's just a bit of good advice that I tend to give to all my classes moving forward. So remember, you can't write them in bullet point forms. I'm going above and beyond. That's 4. So a major component of my job here at UHD and at every other university I've ever worked at is to make myself available to students and answer their questions about content and context in these historical events. And that is before you are tested on it. What I tend to notice is people take the exam, they bomb it, and then they come to me and they go, I didn't understand anything you talked about in the entire first section of the class. That makes me cringe. That is one of those things where it's, look, you obviously didn't not understand a single thing for 5 weeks in the course, right? Please tell me that's not the reality. But if that is the reality, then why didn't I hear from you in week 2? The first week I started really lecturing and you didn't understand anything that was going on. Why didn't I hear from you in week 3 or week 4? Why are you waiting until after you've bombed an exam to come to me with questions about the content? I can't help you then. I can't go back and go, well, cool, you learned it now, so I'm going to go back and give you a higher grade on the exam. It doesn't work that way. You've already lost out on the points. So make sure you're being proactive. Reach out to me in advance. That's when you should be asking questions. You should be going through that study guide and going, I can't find the significance to this term anywhere. That's when an email to me is really viable and impertinent. That's where I'm going to come in and say, here's the significance to it. And now you got your answer. You're ready to go. When you see it on the exam, you're going to get it right. You're not going to come to me afterwards and go, yeah, I couldn't find it in the textbook or your lectures. I didn't really know what you were talking about. Well, you should ask me before, not after. It's too late now. So please, like I said, please don't hesitate to reach out to me before the exam. I am widely available to answer your questions. Don't use Blackboard Messenger, though, because I'm not going to get to it in a timely fashion. I am going to get to direct emails as quickly as I can. But remember, I do have 5 classes a semester. I have over 200 students. And what this means is I'm not going to reach out to you to see if you understand everything. You have to be proactive and reach out to me, at which point I am always happy to talk through stuff with students. It is my job. And anybody who tells you at a university level that that's not what they're here to do, they're feeding you a line of goods. This is a part of our contractual obligations at the university. I have no choice. Even if I didn't want to help you all, which I do because I'm a really cool guy, even if I didn't want to help you, it's still part of my job. I should get fired if I don't help you. So make sure you're making me do my job. Put me to task and make me do what I signed up to do. Come up with those questions beforehand, get them right on the exam, and bump that grade even higher up. So ultimately, last thing I want to say about this is be confident. Approach this test. There's been studies done. I don't understand them. They're done by psychologists and stuff like that. But the point is, they have shown a direct correlation between performance and confidence. Somebody who, even if they're terribly prepared, feels like they're well prepared, does better than somebody who's terribly prepared and knows it. And so, come into the test with confidence and rely on your preparation. You will do better. You're going to do well. If you have prepared for this exam, there's nothing to worry about. Just come in and answer what you know you can answer. And there's really a lot of research out there today that says this new generation of students, I don't want to be ragging on you all as a general group, but there has been studies put out there that say your generation doesn't see a link between studying and doing well on the exam. You don't see a connection. I hope that's bad research, but if it's true, it's a huge problem. Because your instructors, like myself, are not from your generation. And we do see a correlation. And that correlation is very real. The students who prepare are the ones who do well. This is not, nobody gets a grade on an exam. I don't give people grades. You earn a grade. You either prepared and you knew the material and you did well, or you prepared and you knew the material and you didn't do so well, and there's reasons for that, or you didn't prepare at all and you didn't know the material. Those are the 3 options going on here, and generally I see either the former or the latter. You either knew it and you did well, or you didn't and you didn't. And that's just the way it goes. So really, it's important. Don't wait until this is not your high school history class. I'm not asking you when was the Declaration of Independence issued and then giving you 4 years to choose from. This takes some actual thought. This is a university level class. You're not going to be able to cram for this all in one night. So you want to spread out your study sessions. Make sure you're giving yourself enough time to go through a lot. And it is a lot of information, I know. And I do sympathize with that. But that's what we're tasked with doing in a survey course. Sifting through a lot of information, getting down to the brass tacks and what's important. So my advice is study hard, but also study smart. Sitting with a textbook in front of you isn't studying. Having the book open, you don't understand what's going on in the book by osmosis. So if you're sitting there with your phone and the book, it's not studying. Study smart. You're better off putting less time in, but dedicating all of your attention in that time period to studying for that exam. So good luck to you all. Do not be strangers. Don't be shy. Get a hold of me before you take the exam if you have content-related questions. And all right, what the heck? Let's make it 5. Do not use bullet points in those term IDs. And don't cheat or plagiarize. I think I've gotten that. I have beat those horses dead. I think I've covered my bases there. I'll be sending out some updates and stuff as the exam gets a little closer, just reminders and whatever. But you've got your study guide. You've got your review lecture here. Anything else, it's going to have to be done of your own volition. But I am always there to help, so please don't hesitate to reach out. Take care and good luck to you all.